Hey guys, this is Fernando doing another video for the Modern Survivalist. In this case, I wanted to talk about the worst possible scenario in USA. Not only the economy collapsing completely, but the entire country breaking down into outspread civil war in USA. Worst possible scenario. I think that, even though possible, just like many other things are possible, it is very unlikely, but there seems to be quite a bit of people, at least some people, that think that it's not only possible, but it's pretty much very likely and even unavoidable, and it's going to be happening anytime soon. I just want to share my opinion on this, and based mostly on a comment that I've received in my previous video, the one where it's called "What are you preparing for?" There, Trapped Prepper expressed his opinion about civil war pretty much being likely, not only likely but very likely to happen in US. And he went on saying, well, he said, "You have still not addressed my one and only point. What is the harm of preparing for more than your slow slide collapse? Your opinion is very biased based on the fact that your livelihood depends on your experience being relevant. I have made very logical points that you continue to ignore. Of course you will. Your reputation dictates you must. Nothing is ever 100%, but you said it yourself, it is certainly possible. Don't you owe it to your readers to err on the side of caution? If it is possible, then it should be thought about, discussed, and prepared for. Once again, I'll say it, I am very informed, I live here, I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm saying people should not just prepare for a collapse." Well, first of all, and this is something that I've seen people say before, this idea that a full economic collapse is something that isn't that significant, that it's, well, if something like this happens in USA, it's not going to be just an economic collapse. You don't have the slightest bit of an idea of what an economic collapse is. An economic collapse is not some joke. It is not something to be taken lightly. It is dead serious, as in dead, like people dying because of it. It is not just, well, yeah, here it's not going to be just an economic collapse. Here it's going to be civil war. An economic collapse is not just about inflation and employment. The chances of you ever seeing the President of the United States leave the White House, escaping in a chopper, and no one wanting to be president of US anymore, I don't think it's slight or irrelevant or insignificant. I think it would be a pretty serious situation. Again, I honestly believe that people that say these things don't understand how bad an economic collapse, a full economic collapse, a full social economic collapse actually is. Try to think of, there's no more political parties, there's no Republicans and Democrats anymore. Everything is turned down into just a single party people. It's the last name of the political candidates being their own political party. Everything being a complete mess, 99.9% of crimes being unsolved because the police is powerless. There's very little law to speak of, and what little it is, it's not working in your favor, it's actually against you. The poverty outspread, all of a sudden having your wages dropping so much, your income your purchasing power destroyed. You don't understand what it is to one day realize that everything went up 300% in price. You just haven't gone through that, and you just don't take it as seriously as you would if you think about it a little bit more. Imagine for a second that right now you go to a store and everything is 300% more, and you cannot afford it anymore. Unless you are on the upper medium class, it is gonna be you becoming poor. For those that are already on a dire circumstance, it is being below the poverty line and into the place where you don't have enough money to buy enough food so as to keep yourself going. I'm talking about people actually starving to death. So it's not something like, oh, just an economic collapse. It is much more serious than you apparently think. And then here I have, you have still not addressed my one and only point. What is the harm of preparing for more than your slow slide collapse? Well, first of all, it's not my slow slide collapse. What happened in Argentina is pretty much a textbook collapse. If you look at what happens in our places, what has happened throughout history, even not as bad as what happened in Argentina, but an economic crisis like the ones you see in Spain right now, in Greece, they're very similar. There's lots of similarities. Even with what's happening in USA right now, it's very similar in some way to what happened in Argentina. And it's not just me seeing this. There's actually, if you Google it up, Argentina, US, similarities and such, there are quite a bit of them in many aspects of life in general, politically, economically, socially speaking as well. Many similarities that maybe it's not nice to see similarities between your country and a third world country like Argentina, but there are there, and it's not me who wrote those articles that you will easily find when you Google them up. I remember about 10 years ago or so, even the most drastic survivalists said that you will never see a bank being nationalized in US. Back then, we were seeing all that happening in our country. I was seeing that in Argentina, banks being nationalized and all that stuff. And they would say, well, you'll never see any of that happening here in USA. If before that happens, civil war will break out. No one's going to be putting up with that here in US. Then they said that we're not going to be putting up with bailouts in USA. Civil war is going to be happening. There's going to be blood in the streets before we bail out these companies. That's what communists and socialists do. That's not what happens in USA. And still, it keeps on happening. There's this, within this survival movement, there's this tendency of some people, especially that have a particular interest. There's guys that just like all the gloom and doom stuff. They're very catastrophic. They just love that. Then there's some that benefit from it. There's people that make money out of putting fear into the hearts of others, into the hearts of their readers and such. Even some of the most well-known survivalists use that strategy and have been using it for decades. According to them, the U.S. was going to be collapsing in the 80s. U.S. was going to be collapsing in the 90s, and in 91 and 92, and USA was going to be collapsing in the year 2000, and then it was going to be collapsing in 2001, 2, 3. Year by year, every single year going by, these guys said that the United States was going to be collapsing the following year. And when it doesn't, they say it's going to be happening the next year. I just don't understand how people don't see what they're doing when something like that happens. You would suppose that after a couple of years of making false prophecies and saying everything's going to be collapsing next year and that not happening, people would stop taking them seriously. But just some guys love that. I just don't go for it. I have a different approach of things. So, you have still not addressed my one and only point. What is the harm of preparing for more than your slow slide collapse? It's actually something that I made quite clear in the video where the comment here was made. This comment is by Trapped Prepper. In this video, what are you preparing for? I explain quite clearly what's the problem with that. The problem is that when you prepare for something that is so unlikely, you're not focusing on things that are more likely. If you're focusing, when you say, what's the harm of preparing for more than your slow slide collapse, basically you're asking, what's the harm of preparing for a civil war in US? The harm of preparing for civil war in US is that you're not preparing for all those other things that are much more likely to happen in US before you see a civil war take place. And you may be thinking, well, I'll prepare for everything. I'll prepare for an economic crisis, I'll prepare for the economic collapse that isn't really that big a deal, and I'll prepare for civil war as well. Well, no. The problem with that is the strategy you use to approach each one of those is different. The strategy you will have for an economic crisis and even an economic collapse is different from the one you would have for a civil war. if there's civil war happening in U.S., the strategy you should be approaching is actually leaving the country entirely. That's what keeps people alive when there's war, when there's civil war, or there's foreign invasions. I mean, it's just a matter of reading history books and seeing how people survived in places where these things actually took place. Now, if the answer that you want is, well, that you should be preparing by having a fortified homestead with 30 survivalists all gunned up and ready to fight the zombies, and well, that's more in the realm of wishful fantasy fiction or whatever. That's not realistic approach to what actually keeps people alive. Then there's some guys that will be thinking, well, if there's civil war, I'm not going to be leaving my country. I'm going to be staying and fighting, and that's great. I talk about survival, guys. I talk about what keeps you alive, and you know, the logical thing that works, what history teaches us that works and keeps people alive, is not staying and fighting a tyrannic government, but actually escaping it if you can. Even from military point of view, it's many times advised to evacuate and evade and escape, and then regroup, organize, and fight back. And you could apply this to this case as well. If there's civil war, maybe the first thing you want to do is get out of there, maybe get your family out of there as well. Then with more resources, more time, and from a better position yourself, fighting the good fight that you want as a patriot. That would be maybe what I would do, in just my opinion, of course. So the problem with that is that it's a completely different approach, preparing for one thing and the other, and you just cannot do everything. You have to prepare for things that are more likely to happen first. Then when you say your opinion is very biased based on the fact that your livelihood depends on your experience being relevant, you know, questioning my ethics, I don't know where that's coming from. You know, I think that those of you guys that have been following me for a few years know the kind of person I am, and it's not what trapped prepper is saying. You know, trapped prepper, I really don't know why you question the kind of person I am, my ethics and my moral values. Yeah, no. I have made very logical points that you continue to ignore. Of course you will. Your reputation dictates you must. I don't know what that means either. What I experienced in Argentina is just, you know, I just happened to be there when it happened. I learned from that, of course. I'm not saying I didn't. I think that I helped others as well. Most of what I write is freely available online all over the net. Even people that want to copy and paste what I've written, I usually just ask for a link and proper credit where it's due. That's basically it. Most of what I've written, I did write my book, of course, but most of what I've written is freely available online, so I don't know why you question me this way. Yeah, I think I try to do my best with these videos as well. Nothing, your reputation dictates you should. Nothing is ever 100%, but you said it yourself, it is certainly possible. Yes, there's many things that are possible. Civil war in USA, even though possible, I think that it's kind of a unlikely thing to happen. I think that yes, the US is going to be seeing much worse things in the future. But if you're asking me, well, I mean, you're basically getting upset with me because I'm saying that civil war is not a certainty, and it just doesn't make much sense. Don't you owe it to your readers to err on the side of caution if it is possible? If it is possible, it should be thought about, discussed, and prepared for. Well, do I owe it to my readers to err on the side of caution? Don't you think that erring on the side of caution is saying that civil war may be not 100% certain or absolutely one of the things you should be preparing for? I think that that's much more of a cautious approach than just running around scared saying that civil war is going to be breaking out in the country. If I truly believe that there's a civil war heading to US anytime soon, the advice would be to get out of there, and that would go against my own true beliefs. I think that in spite of all the bad things going on, I think that US is still a pretty great place to be in spite of everything. And believe me, I know all bad things happening, but there's really no perfect place these days. especially with the current economic situation. Most of the developed nations are going through tough times. The undeveloped ones, then the third world countries and developing nations, aren't that much better, believe me. But I would be in USA myself if I could. I think that in spite of all the problems, it's still one of the best places to be at. And yes, maybe you should have some plans laid out in case you have to leave all of a sudden, just like you would have to do in any other country, within logical preparations. That is part of the worst case scenario. It's getting out of there if there's ever a very serious problem where you just cannot just stay anymore. That's part of logical planning. But that doesn't mean that a civil war is imminent in USA, and I just don't happen to believe that. If you believe that, that's your opinion and you're entitled to it. Just respect mine as well. And if it is possible, and listen to this, if it is possible, then it should be thought about, discussed, and prepared for. It traps prepper. Listen to that sentence that you wrote yourself. If it is possible, then it should be thought about, discussed, and prepared for. You're basically saying that everything that is possible should be prepared for. That's impossible on itself. You cannot prepare for everything, every single thing that is possible. You have to understand that some things, it's impossible to prepare for absolutely everything that is possible. That's what I'm trying to say. That's why you prepare for those things that are more likely to happen first and will have a big impact in your life. But first of all, it has to be likely to happen. You know, just a meteor blasting half of the world to dust. Is it possible? Yes. Just like it's possible that a bigger meteor just destroys the entire world entirely. If that's possible, then what? You just don't show up to work tomorrow because you're planning on a meteor destroying everything? If it is possible, you should prepare for it. Well, then you mean that a pandemic that kills 80% of the world's population, that is possible. It falls within the realms of possibility. If you prepare for that, then you have to place yourself as far away as you can from any group of people, any major population, large or small. If you're preparing for a worst case pandemic, you just get as far away from everyone as possible. Is that wise preparedness for all the other things that are more likely to happen, such as needing medical assistance, needing to show up to work, earn a living, make an income, having a life? Is that you cannot do everything and prepare for absolutely everything? That's what I'm doing my best here to explain. Once again, I'll say it, I am very informed, I live here, I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm saying people should not just prepare for a collapse. Well, I get it that you live in US and such. I'm not living there. You would be surprised by, I mean, every single day I receive emails from people, especially from US. I receive constant emails from police officers, people in the military of all ranks. I receive email from judges, sheriffs in US telling me about the situation with the gun bans and what they're doing. Especially I think that because of the kind of topics that I cover, I receive emails from people in other countries that are going through tough times, in Eastern Europe, and from Spain as well, because of the crisis there. When the tsunami hit Japan, people from Japan were emailing me and keeping me up to date. You'll be surprised by how up to date I am regarding most of these things. I'm not living there, but I have a very good idea of what's happening in US in terms of the government, in terms of political, of what the political future is looking up like. Yeah, you're seeing loss of liberty, loss of freedom, and attempts to take away from as much as possible. And some of the things that some of the insider guys that of course they ask for a little bit of keeping, not mentioning it, but yes, there's lots of bad things happening. The drones flying and all. You're not going to be finding much better places no matter where you go. If you think that, then you really should spend some time out of US. If you think that US is so bad and everywhere else is so much better, then you have to go to these other places, and you're going to be surprised by how bad it is in terms of authoritarian governments, in terms of socialist governments that take away people's liberty. Big Brother is pretty much everywhere. In most developed nations, there is in general loss of freedom to a significant degree. And yeah, absolutely, 4 years from now, US is not going to be looking much better in that way either. Now, you're telling me that civil war is an absolutely certainty. We just have to disagree there. I just don't think that it's 100% certain thing, civil war in the next 3 or 4 years in US. Yeah, as I've said in previous videos, it's going to be tough times. I don't even think you're going to be seeing a full economic collapse like we saw in Argentina. Really, I think that it's going to be tough times. There's going to be more loss of freedom. Of course, the gun grabbers are going to be trying to do that, and there's an obvious political stance behind all that of restricting liberty in many ways, and it's all part of the same game being played. And yeah, it sucks, absolutely, that no question about that. But there's still things you can do so as to stay out of the radar as much as possible and be affected as little as possible in spite of all these things happening. And again, at least if that's your concern, there's really not much other places where you will find a better situation. So that's it, guys. I understand that some of you may think that a civil war is imminent. I just happen to think differently, and that's it. That's my opinion on what would be a worst case scenario. If you ever have something like that happening, and it's not something, well, finally, here where it says, I'm saying people should not just prepare for a collapse. Maybe trapped prepper, maybe you missed it. I have an entire playlist that's called Relocating and Bugging Out. Those videos, the videos under the playlist of Relocating and Bugging Out, are precisely for this worst case scenario that you have in mind. Again, if you think that you're going to be solving a worst case scenario such as this one by building a fort and fighting the government with a couple of your friends, that is not a wise move in terms of survival. What it is logical and what has worked, I don't focus alone on my own experience in Argentina by any means. It's been years since people that have been following me understand that I look at different historic events and try to learn from that. Based on that research, what keeps you alive is relocating and bugging out. So that's why I've done these videos as well, for people to look and keep in mind. Guys, that's basically it. Almost, yeah, 3 a.m. already, not kidding. That's it, guys, for today. Hope you subscribe, because there's always more stuff coming up. Have a great day. See you on our next video.